Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how your brain manages to juggle so many different things at once, like remembering a face while also paying attention to a conversation? Well, today we're diving into some really cool science that suggests your brain might be like a super flexible toolbox, using the same basic mental tools for all sorts of different jobs. Imagine your brain as this incredibly complex system, right? And we often think about different parts of our thinking, like memory, attention, or decision-making, as separate boxes. But what if they aren't? What if they're more like Lego bricks that get put together in different ways to build different cognitive structures? That is the big idea behind this fascinating new research. The researchers here point out that higher-level thinking is naturally multidimensional. It is not just one thing happening at a time, it's a mix of processes working together. Think about trying to learn something new. You are not just receiving information, you are probably paying attention to it, maybe trying to connect it to what you already know, and perhaps even suppressing distractions. All these things are happening at once, and traditionally, scientists have studied them in isolation. It is like trying to understand an orchestra by only listening to the violin, then only the drums, and never hearing how they blend together. This is where the exciting idea of compositionality comes in. It suggests that our cognitive processes are like reusable building blocks. When you learn a new skill or face a new situation, your brain doesn't necessarily invent entirely new ways of thinking. Instead, it cleverly recombines these existing fundamental processes. Think of it like a musician using the same notes and chords to create countless different songs. The evidence for this idea is coming from studies with humans, animals, and even artificial intelligence. They're finding that neural patterns related to certain cognitive functions can actually be detected across different tasks. So, how does this work in the brain? The key seems to be that these cognitive processes are represented in an abstract way. This means the brain isn't just encoding the specifics of a single task. Instead, it is capturing the essential role or function of a process, making it independent of the particular situation. This abstraction is what allows these neural patterns to be so flexible and transferable. It is like having a general concept of going forward that applies whether you are walking, driving, or swimming. This ability of neural representations to be abstract and reusable is the foundation for what the researchers call cross-domain transfer. For a long time, scientists have used different methods to try and understand these cognitive processes. One way is called forward inference. This is where researchers change something about the task, like making it harder or easier, and then see how the brain activity changes. It has been super useful, but it has limitations. You have to deliberately change the task. So you can't really study what is happening spontaneously. Plus, it often focuses on just one process at a time, making it tough to see how multiple processes work together. Then there is reverse inference. This is where you see a certain brain activity and then try to guess which cognitive process is happening. The problem here is that many brain areas do many different jobs. So just seeing activity in one area doesn't tell you for sure what is going on. It is like seeing a hammer and guessing that someone is building a house, but they could also be fixing a table, or even making art. It is a good clue, but not definitive proof. This is where newer methods, especially machine learning, have really changed the game. Instead of looking at just one specific brain area or one type of brainwave, these techniques can look at complex patterns of activity across many parts of the brain. They can actually decode what is going on in your brain on a trial-by-trial basis. Imagine being able to tell just by looking at brain signals if someone is remembering something they saw earlier or if they're about to make a decision. Studies have already shown we can do this for things like what you are seeing, what you are trying to remember, and even how well you are going to remember it later. Building on this, researchers started looking at within-domain transfer. This is where they train a decoder on brain activity from one part of an experiment, say when you are learning something, and then see if that same decoder can make sense of brain activity from another part of the same experiment, like when you are trying to recall it later. They found that neural patterns can indeed generalize across different phases of the same task. This shows that some brain signals related to a process are present both when you are learning and when you are recalling. But the big question remained, can this transfer even further to completely different tasks and situations? And that is where cross-domain transfer comes in, the core of this paper. It asks, can we learn the neural signature of a cognitive process in one specific task, and then use that knowledge to monitor that same process when someone is doing a completely unrelated task? Think about it. Can the way your brain represents paying attention during a simple attention task tell us about your attention level while you are trying to remember a complex story? The answer, the research suggests, is yes. In one study they highlight, researchers used 3 different tasks: each designed to specifically activate different cognitive processes, like visual perception, sustained attention, and selective attention. They then recorded brain activity, specifically EEG signals. During these tasks, by analyzing these signals, they figured out the unique brain patterns associated with each of these separate processes. The really clever part is what happened next. They took these learned signatures from the first tasks and used them to decode brain activity while participants were engaged in a completely different, unrelated task, in this case, an episodic memory task. And guess what? They were able to independently track how much each of those initial processes, like attention and perception, was being used during the memory task. Even more importantly, they found that the level of engagement of these processes during memory encoding actually predicted how well people would remember things later. This is huge because it means we can see how basic cognitive building blocks contribute to complex behaviors. Now, putting this into practice isn't just a matter of running a few experiments. The researchers offer some really practical advice. First, when you are choosing which cognitive processes to study, you need to be smart about it. You can either target specific processes you are curious about, or you can go for a more comprehensive approach, looking at a wide range of candidate processes. The key is to pick tasks that really focus on the process you care about while minimizing the influence of others. Crucially, you need to make sure the task you are using actually measures what you think it does. They suggest a rigorous way to do this. If you want to know if a certain task helps you measure process P, you should use several different tasks that are all thought to tap into process P. You also include a sham process that you don't expect to be involved in your main task. The idea is that the neural signatures from the real process tasks should align with each other, but not with the sham process. This validation makes the findings much more robust. Of course, like any scientific method, cross-domain transfer isn't perfect. One limitation is that no cognitive task is perfectly pure. Even in tasks designed to isolate one process, others will inevitably get involved. Also, cognitive processes aren't always totally separate. They can share some brain activity. But the researchers argue that these limitations don't stop us from doing good science. By carefully designing tasks and using multiple tasks to measure the same process, we can still get very specific and sensitive measures of individual cognitive components. So, what is the big payoff here? This approach allows us to test theories about how our minds work in a much more detailed way. Instead of just saying memory is complex, we can now say things like when someone is trying to remember a complex event, successful memory relies on a specific balance of high attention, low distraction, and a certain level of perception. This figure beautifully illustrates the idea. You have a target task, say memory retrieval, and you record brain activity. Then, using cross-domain transfer, you decode the engagement of different underlying cognitive processes like perception, attention, and inhibition on a trial-by-trial basis. This gives you a multidimensional profile of what is happening mentally. Finally, you can see how strongly each of these decoded processes predicts whether someone will remember something or not. This allows for a mechanistic decomposition of cognition, showing how distinct combinations of these shared building blocks create different cognitive functions. One of the most exciting future applications is in real-time interventions. Imagine brain-computer interfaces that can not only read your brain signals but also understand why you might be struggling with a task. If the system detects low sustained attention during learning, it could prompt a break. If it is low selective attention, it could perhaps highlight the important cues. This is about tailoring interventions to the specific underlying cognitive issue rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. In essence, this research is a major step towards understanding cognition not as a collection of separate abilities, but as a dynamic system built from reusable, abstract cognitive processes. Cross-domain transfer is a powerful tool that lets us peek under the hood and see these processes in action across different mental activities. It's transforming cognitive processes from abstract ideas into directly measurable quantities. And that, my friends, is the essence of cracking the multidimensionality of cognition. It's about seeing the brain as a masterful builder using a versatile set of tools to construct all the amazing things our minds can do. It is a really exciting frontier in understanding ourselves. So, what do you think about this idea of cognitive building blocks? Does it make sense with your own experiences? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.